You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 138. She created the impossible. Welcome to How to Get Over Your Ex, a podcast on getting over your ex without it just taking time. I'm your host, breakup coach Dorothy. Let's turn your pain into power and your heartbreak into happy. Hello, my beautiful Bravehearts. How is everyone doing? I am so excited to have you here. Summer is hip hopping along, you guys. I am pumped. It is spring here in Florida. And my roommate put on her spring tie-dye tank top this morning. It got me all kinds of excited. And I was like, I'm going to put my pina colada pineapple sweatshirt on that I got from Bali. And I'm going to bebop around this morning. And I'm just like on a whole nother vibe. So then I get to start my day today recording with fellow Braveheart Sara. She's a Braveheart alumni, was in the program just recently. And we sat here and we read the description for today's podcast episode. I create them ahead of time. And it was such a vibe. And I cannot wait to have this conversation with Sara and for you guys to learn so much from her experience in creating things that truly feel impossible. I cannot wait for her to share her story because honestly, the thing that she created felt so impossible. It felt so real that there was no way she was going to create this. And somehow in the 3 months that she was in this program, she did. And I cannot wait for her to share her insights with you so that you can go out and create what feels impossible to you. So, Sara, without further ado, is that the right saying? Without further ado? I think so.
I think so. Yeah, sure. Sounds good to me.
Tell us about yourself. Tell us who you are, where you're from. Tell us your breakup story and what led you here inside of the Get Over Your Ex program.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Sara, as you guys all know, and I'm based out of a town in northern British Columbia, Canada, called Prince George. My breakup journey started last summer. I'd been with my partner of 10 years. We've been married for 2 of them. And we kind of just got to a place one day, kind of hit us one day, where we realized we actually wanted different things out of life and different things out of our relationship. So we started with the trial separation, and initially, it was actually really amicable. But as the trial separation turned into a more long-term one, I started to go down the rabbit hole and experience some anger and resentment for kind of how we had gotten to that place. And so I came to the Get Over Your Ex program, I think about 7 months into my separation, just really wanting to move past the feelings of anger and resentment. Yeah.
Amazing. So tell us more about this because this was something I wanted to cover. We're going to talk about creating the impossible. Don't worry, but I think it's really important that we talk about anger and resentment because you had to move through those emotions before you could allow something to come through for the impossible. So tell us, can you tell us anything about why you were angry and resentful? Like what thoughts were creating so much anger? What thoughts were creating so much resentment? Because if you've been listening to the podcast, you know thoughts create feelings. And if you're new, welcome to the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast. And please note that thoughts, the sentences in your brain, create your feelings. So it's not your ex, but it's the sentences in your brain. So tell us more. What stories did you have that were creating so much anger and so much resentment?
Yeah, so the 2 primary stories that were kind of taking up all my brain space were, number one, that this breakup was harder for me because I was the one who actually moved out. So I left. We both agreed to actually leave him with the property. We had good reasons for that at the time. But as I was sort of having to kind of get a rental place and kind of set myself up again, I just had this narrative that everything was harder for me compared to him. And so that created some anger and resentment. And then also the other story that I had a hard time moving through was the fact that he actually did start to see other people pretty quick into our separation. And it wasn't a secret. He even gave me notice that this was going to happen. But just kind of watching him and coming to the realization that, yeah, this is happening. He's starting to see other people, like that kind of hit me pretty hard. Yeah. And so that's, I guess I was really struggling with like, how can he from all intents and purposes, it looked like he was moving past the breakup really quickly.
And it gives you more evidence as to why it was easier for him and not for you. It's like he clearly it's easier because he's moved through it and he's on to other people already.
Yeah, exactly. I just couldn't understand it. Like but to me, it was like the ultimate evidence. Yeah.
So many people are going to resonate with that. So tell us, how did you overcome those stories? Where did you land with those stories and how did you get there?
Yeah. So in terms of like my anger and resentment towards him and him moving on, at least like with that particular narrative. So when I was in the Get Over Your Ex program, you have a part of the program where we have to rewrite our breakup story. And one component of that exercise, you ask us to actually rewrite the story from their point of view, our ex's point of view. And that actually was a really great starting point for me in terms of like planting the seed of what it might have been like for him, like how difficult the breakup actually might have been for him and why he decided to start seeing other people, or just starting to understand like where his struggles could have been. Like just starting to think about it from that perspective was actually really helpful. And then in terms of the narrative about me having to start over and it be more difficult for me, I think just owning, like kind of taking ownership of the choices that I made. And it was a choice that I made, and challenging or trying to make it more of an empowering choice around that. It was a good choice for me to kind of move on and start over again for me in a way that made sense to me.
Yes. So quick question, after everything that's happened, do you really feel like that you were the one that was supposed to move out? Are you glad that you moved out?
I am, yes. And I think because, like, kind of thinking back on it, like, I'm glad I had the experience, like, of I bought a property with my ex, my husband, and it was a rural property. We had a chance. It was kind of his dream to have sort of a rural lifestyle, kind of create a big garden, maybe start practicing some homesteading, day-to-day things like that.
And you had chickens, your baby
Chickens. Yeah, it was an experience I don't regret, and I'm really glad I had the experience. But it was his dream. It was his dream that we were kind of chasing with that property, and just given the way life kind of played out for me, I actually didn't really, during our the time together, really actually take the time to sit down and figure out, well, what would have my dream looked like. Like it just sort of worked out that way, that I was still in school and he really wanted to chase his dream. So we bought this property, but it was very much kind of from the perspective of him sort of taking charge of it. And so for me having to move out, it made me realize I really had to sit down and figure out, well, what do I actually want out of life? And as I started thinking about it, yeah, my vision started to look a little bit different than the rural style that we had initially chased after. So it's a good thing from that.
I have the chills from that. Like I'm getting chills hearing you say that because, I resonate with that so much. And I'm sure there's a lot of individuals here listening that resonate with that. You get so absorbed into your partner's world. And I'll never forget, there was one time I started dating my last boyfriend before Jake, where it's so funny. We project these things onto people. And I projected this whole like, we're going to travel the world and he's going to take all these fancy photos of me. And we're going to be like that influencer travel the world couple. And he had projected like, she's going to pick up photography and she's going to be a photographer and we're going to shoot weddings together as this like power couple wedding photographer. And neither of those were us. And so it's just so funny because you either dive into that and go into that, like I did with my previous ex-boyfriend with fantasy football. I was like, I'm going to be the best fantasy football. And I'm personally not interested in football at all. I just wanted to spend time with him. And so that I thought that was the route to spend time with him. So it's so fascinating. I love hearing everyone's different kind of perspective from that. So when you started looking at your dreams and what you wanted for your life, what did that look like when you started uncovering that?
Yeah. So, it's still a work in progress in terms of like developing that vision. But like one thing I realized that, well, I want to have the ability to spend more time on sort of wildlife conservation projects that I'm passionate about. Um, and also have more time for that. And also just have more time to sort of do the things that I love doing, like hiking and being outside in nature, camping, those kinds of activities. And then in terms of and let's see, in terms of lifestyle, I had to move back into town, and I actually enjoy being in town because it allowed being back in town, in town. It has allowed me to reconnect with friends again, and it made me realize like that's actually really important to me, like being able to make it easier for myself to actually go out and visit friends on whim, and spend more time with them that way. So in terms of a lifestyle shift, like I've been starting to sort of lean more towards that, whereas before, like my life was very much tied to the rural property, and it was a big project, a big renovation project, but also a big project in terms of building gardens, and it took up all our time, the majority of our time. But it just made me realize that there's other things I want to spend time on.
I love that. Right. And it's all about time distribution of investing in your priorities. And it's hard when you have one partner and their priorities are this one big thing and you want them to go after those dreams. But then at the same time, you don't want to lose sight of what your dreams are.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I've often thought about it, like dating in general. Even before I met this previous partner, I always thought like when I was dating in my early 20s, I felt like I was trying on other people's lifestyle. And this one felt like with my most recent partner, my most recent ex, it felt like a pretty close match. But there were some things that were still critical for me that I'm learning that were missing from that lifestyle.
I love the visualization of that. I'm trying on other people's lifestyles. Like that's so fascinating. And like, I mean, it kind of reminds me of dating for exploration. It's like you can have a lot of self exploration through dating and getting to know other people's ins and outs. It almost kind of also like the portal of possibility, right? Where it's like, oh, I didn't even know this was available to me. I didn't even know this kind of lifestyle was a thing. Do I like it? Do I not? But you don't know until you halfway kind of experience or put your foot in.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that too. The portal of possibility.
Yeah, so good. I love that. Okay. So I have a little bit before we dive into creating the impossible, which to me is like my favorite part of your story. I still feel like there's a little bit more that I want to touch on in terms of anger and resentment. Can you just explain to us a little bit about when you finally had the click, like the moment where the anger and resentment dissipated? What was that like? And what do you feel instead of anger and resentment?
Yeah, so the moment where I realized it had actually clicked, so after a few weeks of, learning how to cry and feel my feelings and all that stuff, which was very pivotal. I'm glad. I'm glad I know how to do that now. And go through some of the exercises. I remember over Christmas, I had some time off for myself, and I was rereading emails that my ex had sent to me during the first few months of our separation. He had written these long, essentially letters, digital letters, kind of trying to explain his point of view. And they were a little bit back and forth, but they were quite honest. And I remember like when I had first read them, how angry they had made me feel. Like just that I just felt like he was just trying to jerk me around. Like when I read those emails initially, even the first couple times I read those emails. And then months later, halfway or at least a quarter way to the program, rereading those emails again, I actually just kind of felt the wind go out of my sails, because instead I just realized that it just clicked for me that this was someone who was just genuinely confused, trying to figure out what he wanted and whether or not it was even possible to have what he actually really wanted within the context of our relationship. So it all of a sudden my brain was like, this isn't a bad guy. Like, we don't need to paint him as an archetypal bad guy. He really is just a human being who's confused and trying to figure out what he wants out of life, much like I'm trying to do right now.
So beautiful. And it doesn't have anything to do with you. Like, his confusion and not knowing if what he can have is available to him truly has everything to do with what he's thinking about himself and his capability and his stuff. And that's not baggage that you need to take on and make about you. And I feel like
Absolutely.
so good. You just took that and embodied it. Just a breath of fresh air. It's just
Yeah.
a breath of fresh air, my friends. Okay. Is there anything else that you feel like would be useful for any Braveheart who might be struggling with a lot of anger and resentment?
Yeah, I guess my comment to that would just be I would just challenge any Braveheart who's currently kind of in the thick of it. And I know it might take some time, or maybe not even time, but just, it could be a process. But I challenge any Braveheart to challenge the narrative they might have about um, there being a good guy and a bad guy in the relationship, or the breakup, I should say, whether the bad guy is your ex or whether the bad guy is even yourself, for that matter. Kind of challenge that narrative.
That's a good one. Even if it's yourself, because I think a lot of us feel really poorly about how we showed up in the relationship. And we think if we could have changed that, maybe the breakup wouldn't have happened. So I love the way that you said that, because it isn't. We're not good or bad, you guys. We have good and bad. It's an and. And when you think about it, remember that someone else's actions have nothing to do with you and everything to do with the narrative that's going on in their brain.
And I didn't even realize like how strong that narrative was until we had a few coaching sessions together. And you kind of really helped me realize, like, oh yeah, this is sort of the background. This is the voice in my brain. This is the story that I have for sure happening.
Yeah.
And even the part that took me by surprise was, like, even after I'd forgiven him, I realized that there's still a lot of work I had to do to forgive myself for like you mentioned, my part, for what I perceived as my part in the breakup, for wanting different things, not fighting harder for the relationship. Yeah, all of those things.
Coaching is such a beautiful tool, isn't it? It's like you can't see it. You don't see it in yourself. I still get coached every single week, you guys, and there's still stories that I don't see, that I can't see, even as much as I write down, as much as I journal, as much as it's just a totally different thing to have someone else reflect it back to you.
Oh yeah, they felt like blind spots for sure. Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Are you excited? I'm excited to talk about this part. Let's talk about creating the impossible. I don't know what is going on with me, but this year, you guys, I mean, I told you a couple episodes back that this year is my fairy tale year. I'm going to live it as if it's the fairy tale, all the things. There's just so many. I'm like starting to see and like open up my eyes to all the things that used to feel impossible to me that I have created now and are now in my life physically, in the reality. And so I am just obsessed with creating the impossible. And we have an impossibility workshop in the Get Over Your Ex program. I preach about it in the Next Chapter mentorship. It is just like all over the fucking place for me. And I just love creating the impossible with my Braveheart. So, Sara, please tell us what you created. Tell us what happened. Bring us through this journey of how you created the impossible, what felt impossible to you.
Yeah, I still actually can't believe it played out the way it did. It's a little crazy to me, even now. Until I move in a couple of weeks, and until I'm standing in the house, it probably won't really hit me like how real it is. But yeah, so one of the things that I struggled with when we first separated was this realization that, oh yeah, one of the first things I learned about myself being on my own again was I actually do want to have a home. Like having a home is actually fairly important to me. And where I live, like just generally in British Columbia, Canada, housing has always been kind of a hot topic, at least for as long as I've been around. So I grew up in Vancouver, which is the biggest city in British Columbia, so on the southern part of the province, and it's like one of the most expensive cities in all of North America. It's $100 million homes. And growing up there, I actually never believed I would ever be a homeowner. It just wasn't even part of my vision, because even growing up back then, it was like, wait, it just seemed out of reach. And then I moved to northern British Columbia, which was way more affordable. But I still didn't, the first home that I purchased was with my partner. I wouldn't have thought about purchasing a home unless it was actually with my previous partner, because that's what he wanted.
Portal of
And
possibility. I have to pause you there, right? Portal of possibility, showing you something that you didn't even know existed or was in your like mind of wanting. And he shows you that you want it. Just throwing it out there. Okay, continue.
Yeah, absolutely. No, 100%. Like it's quite possible. I still would without him to kind of open that possibility to me, that I may still not even be in my my vision. But yeah, so we own this property together, and granted, like I mentioned before, it was hard being tied to the property 100%, but it was still something that was mine, and there were aspects of it that I loved, that we were building a home that was completely ours. There was some security in that. It was our home, and I realized like how I did actually love that aspect of it. And it felt possible because it was with him, financially, but also, owning a home is a lot of work. It can be a lot of work, can require like a skill set if you decide to do the work yourself, and of course, maintenance and time. So with him, it felt quite doable. And then, of course, when we broke up, well, two things happened. First, I ended up back in the rental market, which my rental situation is good. I'm quite fortunate that way. But like 10 years later, I realized, oh, the housing market in Prince George has changed quite a bit. It's a lot more expensive. Renting is a lot more expensive. And I just, I missed aspects of being able to own my own home. I couldn't have my cat with me. I'm limited in the space.
Your chickens.
My
chickens.
You
couldn't bring your chickens.
Yeah, exactly. Like sort of aspects of that. So I started to realize that, yeah, having a home was something that I really wanted. But at the time, it still felt impossible, because I was on my own, solo, and financially it felt like out of reach. And again, because of the time factor, I was doubting myself that I would be able to sort of do home ownership on my own, go through the process of buying a home on my own, being able to maintain it on my own. So that was kind of like the challenges I had up front with that. And then going through the program, I started to work through that a bit, because like reasserting, yes, I do want to be a homeowner again.
And the anger and resentment was a really important piece of that, because you were holding things that happened in the past, decisions that you had made in the past, as evidence as to why you couldn't own a home now. And it was so fascinating to watch, because you had to not only release anger and resentment against your ex, but you had to also release the anger and resentment that you had to yourself about the decisions you made in the past that you felt were holding you back from creating a home now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because the anger and resentment it was like a cloud hanging over my head. It was like a fog, essentially. Like I couldn't see very far in front of me. It was kind of all consuming. So it just occupied a lot of brain space. And so I really couldn't imagine, like in a concrete way, like what I wanted my future to look like without moving past those emotions, because I was just too fixated on the past, like you said, with that. And also the other thing, which was really critical to being able to purchase a home, especially within the time frame that when it happened, was finding creative solutions, which I know you've coached me on extensively. when you're like in that headspace of anger and resentment and thinking about the past and all the bad things that happened, you're not kind of open to more creative solutions. And that's what it took for me to get into this place in the time frame that I did.
Yes, right. So tell us what does a creative solution headspace feel like? What are the emotions that allowed you? Because if we think about the model, which some of you listening might not be super familiar with, but it is a tool that we use with one of the many tools we use in the program. But creative problem solving is an action or a behavior that we do, which means it's fueled by an emotion. So, what emotions were you feeling that led to the creative problem solving?
You know what? I would say that the emotion was confidence that I was going to make it happen
Oh,
somehow.
yes, I am on board. So I am going to make this happen somehow, which makes me feel confident, which then opens my mind up to what are all the ways this could happen instead of this is never going to happen. It's impossible, which makes you feel angry and defeated, which then leads you to spinning and ruminating about the past, beating yourself up about past decisions. Like those are two very different ways of being. And so you changed your way of being to create something out of thin air. This is like
Yeah.
Dr. Joe Dispenza stuff, you guys, where it's like instead of changing matter to change matter, you changed your energy to change your matter, meaning you changed your way of being. You're being the homeowner before you create the home versus doing everything you think you possibly could, taking like all this action while still angry. And then it's going to take like a lot longer for you to create that shift in your reality. But you changed your being, the way you were thinking, feeling, and behaving to create a different reality. I just like blows my fucking mind. I'm so excited for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And because like actually the first time that I'd sort of taken concrete action towards home ownership, I guess to give just a very, very brief background of how it played out. So we drafted up our separation agreement in the first month of the program. And typically with a separation agreement, I think for most, it's like you have 30 days for your partner to buy you out of a property or whatever assets you guys own before they remove you from the house title, the property that you're on. And that house title, if you're trying to buy a new house, I mean, that house title would, you being on the house title would be they count it towards your debt ratio, and it can affect your ability to apply for a mortgage. So like, but the buyout has to happen first before they can remove you from the title. So anyways, like we had done something unusual with our agreement so that I gave him, instead of 30 days, I gave him like a full year to buy me out. And so, but initially the bank was like, don't worry about it. You'll probably still be able to apply for a mortgage, just given your current income scenario. And so I actually gave it a try. Like I tried to apply for a mortgage in the very beginning in January, but as it turns out, the math just didn't quite add up for the banks. It was close, but not good enough. So they said, sorry, you'll have to just wait for a year for the buyout. And I remember like immediately going into that headspace of just like, oh, it's all his fault. Like that, just totally being in the thick of it, just being angry and frustrated and going back to my old narratives that he had it so easy compared to me in the breakup again. And really, like I shut down. I completely shut down like for a week. I think you coached me on it that week and it started to get better again. But
yes, you were so upset.
I was
And
very upset.
hold on. I think this is really important too to look at is now that you've got your dream home, you've purchased your dream home, it's done. What would you tell yourself? What would you tell that version of yourself who just went through applying and was told you can't apply again or you won't be able to buy another home until a year from now and you don't get this home that you thought you wanted really badly? Like, what would you tell her now if you could go back as who you are today with the home that you have? What would you tell her?
I would tell her take that advice with a grain of salt, but that maybe that wasn't the right house. that
Yeah.
initial house you were applying for actually wasn't, there was something better waiting for you. Yeah.
Oh, the chills, you guys, because this shit also applies to your breakup. Like this is what I'm talking about is like something, it's either going to be this or better. We're not going backwards, you guys. We don't, just because we didn't get the home that we desire doesn't mean we're going to accept a home that's less than. You're the one that's in charge of accepting the house. Don't accept less than. That's the only thing you have to do is decide, nope. If this looks worse than the home that I wanted, it's a no, period. And it's the same thing with your partner. We're not going to accept less than the ex that your ex. Or if it doesn't, if you're if the new partner that's being presented is less than your old partner, you don't accept. Just that easy. I love it.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so continue. So you were so distraught about them telling you. Oh, and that's another thing that I wanted to mention too, that I think is important because I did this recently as well, of like taking other people's words as facts. How many times do we go to an expert or even not an expert? We just listen to our parents or our friends or someone who's gone through something once. And they're like, this is how it goes. And it's miserable and it's terrible and blah, 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 blah. And you can't do this and you can't do that. And then we're like, that means I can't do it. Instead of deciding on purpose what we're going to do and what we're going to believe. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it made me realize too that, I mean, it's not that they weren't giving me bad information. Like probably in a lot of scenarios, that is correct. I probably would have had to just wait the normal allotted amount of time based on their experience and how things normally work. But
yes, normally work. But are you guys normal? Are Bravehearts normal? No. We are extraordinary. We are doing the impossible. It reminds me of my car situation too, where it's like when I went to go buy my car at the beginning of 2020, I remember I know that cars are not an investment. They are there's a word for it, a liability, where it's like always going to be taking money. It's not something that you create money out of. You don't like get more money out of your car the longer you have it. And I know that, but at the time when I kept going to like buy cars, I just kept having this thing in my brain being like, can I buy a car in a way that makes it an investment? And of course, everyone's laughing at me. The car salesman's like, you're fucking ridiculous. It's not going to be. Like, just get that out of your mind. That is not going to be the case. And then, of course, with these crazy, ironic, weird world circumstances that we're in, there's this chip shortage. So therefore, my car, if I sold it today, I would make $5,000 off of it, $4,000 to $5,000. What? That makes zero sense. But again, it just goes to show you like anything is possible and we don't have to take on, I mean, of course you always can. I'm not saying don't make informed decisions, but if the information you're getting doesn't serve you or move you forward towards your dreams, don't take it on as your own. You don't have to.
Yeah, they may not be thinking outside of the box either, when they're giving you that information at the time. I'm sure there's like also very creative ways to turn your car into an investment. Like,
right. And it's not their life on the line. It's
yes.
not their life on the line. They're like, oh yeah, no, this is my client, my customer. And of course, I'm sure they care about you, but it's not their life on the line. It's yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a different amount of thought and energy that's going to go into the advice.
So how did you get creative with this? Do you want to explain like what happened when you got creative and like all the things, or tell us more about how you found your dream house and how you came about purchasing it?
Yeah. So in terms of creative solutions for this particular goal, I would say that first off, like the most important part was just kind of getting out of that headspace of, oh, it's just not going to happen for me. Like that was number one, the most important. And then coming to this place, like the next phase of it for me was, okay, I am going to make this happen. It's just that I'm going to have to give up. Maybe I have to give up my scarce thoughts, my scarcity thoughts that it's got to happen right this second. That was the first thing too. And then it's going to happen and it'll happen when it's ready. And I'm just going to start working towards it. And when it happens, it happens. sort of like
Okay.
that was like the next mental stage.
Pause. Huge, huge, huge. That is the difference between attachment versus commitment. Being not attached to the how. You're like, it's going to happen. I don't know how. And I'm letting go of the urgency of needing it now. You released attachment and you gained commitment by saying it's going to happen. Chills. Again, I'm getting shivers. Continue. Tell me.
Yeah.
So that was phase 2. Beautiful.
That's exactly what it was. I guess just releasing the attachment of like how I thought it had to go down in that second. And just accepting or believing that, yeah, this is going to happen for me. I'm going to make it happen. But yeah, how is still yet to be seen. So then kind of how it worked out for me was I actually did so I'm a person who likes lists. So I create a list of, okay, well, what are all the steps to home ownership first off? So kind of make it look tangible in that way for me. And I started just going through the steps. Like I got a real estate agent. I made sure the bank had all the information they would need to do pre-approval. Just started doing things preemptively like that to set myself up. And then, and then 2 things kind of happened, which was quite amazing. That kind of made it happen in the time frame that it did. First off, I had a really honest conversation with my ex about, that I really missed having my own home, and if he could find a way to sort of buy me out before the end of the year, that would mean a lot. And I didn't know it until he kind of showed up to we work at the same place. I should just kind of mention that, because he showed up after a couple of weeks after that conversation. He showed up to my office one morning and he's like, I've got a check for you. And I'm like, what? He found a creative solution to buy me out much sooner. So he arranged his original plans, which was beautiful. Like that was beautiful for him to do.
And we have to pause here, because if you were still angry and resentful, number 1, you wouldn't have had that conversation. And number 2, if you did have that conversation, it would have come out in a very different way and probably not have led to like a kind, caring exchange.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
Mind blowing. Mind blown. Okay. Love it. Continue.
Yeah. So that was the first huge step, is having that conversation and him deciding to try and make it happen for me. So much gratitude for that. And then the second part was, so I had the buyout now. That was great. They could start the lawyers could start the process of removing me from house title. But when I showed up to sign the final documentation at the lawyer's office, they still mentioned to me like, hey, just so you know, like it's still going to take like maybe a couple months for the banks to process this paperwork. So you probably can't hit the ground running quite yet. And so I was like, okay, being able to house hunt during the summer is it's difficult for me because I'm on the road quite a bit for work. So because of that, the summer approaching and the time it would take to process, there was still a part of me that believed that, okay, so home ownership probably wasn't going to happen for me this year because of the amount of time it would take for the lawyers to process. But I thought I was still in the mind frame that, well, let's just go through all the steps and see what happens. And I just decided to ask more questions. I went to my bank. And I thought, okay, so just so you know, I just threw out an email one day. That doesn't hurt to ask, right? Like, let's just ask. So to my financial advisor, I just let her know, like, hey, the lawyers have my signature. You're going to see the paperwork pretty soon. I know that they're the ones, that was the other thing too, is they're the ones processing that paperwork. And so I asked them like, hey, would you feel comfortable doing a special authorization to give me a pre-approval for a mortgage right now, knowing that you're being the ones to see all that paperwork coming down the pipe? And they agreed to it, because if I went to another bank, they probably would have had to wait the 2 months. But because I agreed to stay with them, to give my next mortgage to them, they agreed to sort of give me a special authorization for me to proceed with that pre-approval. So that was the next stage.
So excited. And then, okay, so then how long did it take you to actually find the home?
Okay, so that was the other crazy thing too. So once my financial advisor gave me the green light, I thought, okay, I let my real estate agent know, hey, we could start looking again. And I had a couple months before my field season. So my work takes me out on the road and into outside into the great outdoors, remote places. So I call it the field. And before my field season was going to start and take all my time, I thought I have 2 months to just start looking. Maybe I'll just take this time to figure out, to really get to know what I like in a house. And so that was my intention.
It's
And then,
literally like an unattachment, just pure unattachment. Like, oh yeah. It's a whole vibe. I love it. Continue. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. It's just so good.
That's absolutely, that's exactly what it was. I was just like unattached, like, okay, this is going to be a learning experience for the next couple months until I can really like put an offer in. But okay, so literally I had the website that kind of lists all the real estate that comes up for sale every day. I had it sort of open on the second screen of my desktop computer while I was working on a report, and it just pops up, like this particular listing pops up. There's no photos for it yet. There's just a description. And I read the description. I'm like, oh, that's very intriguing. That's like a neighborhood that in town that I really enjoy. It's close to a lot of friends of mine. Walking distance to my favorite yoga studio and farmers market, and all these things. It's the right size. It's the right price. So I like phoned up my agent immediately. I'm like, I think I should go see this place. And she's like, yep, I think you should too. Let's go tomorrow morning. So I'm like, great. So I show up to this house and still not knowing what it looks like. And I'm like, as soon as I show up to the house, I'm like, oh, I know this house. So the first month of my separation, the summer prior, I had been living in an Airbnb for a month because it's supposed to be a trial. And this house that I was looking at to potentially buy, was right across the street from that Airbnb. So I remember like sitting on the porch of this Airbnb, drinking my coffee in the morning, staring at this house going, oh, it's a cute house. Adorable.
Shut the front door. What? So cool. So cool.
It was very cool. It was very cool. And I did the tour of the house. I'm like, yeah, I can live here. This is perfect. This is beautiful. I think I should try putting a bid on this place. And then again, I had to go through another period of non-attachment because a few days later, my agent was like, just so you know, and I shouldn't say a few days because the market is so hot in Prince George right now. Like this house was looking at offers within 48 hours of it listing. So essentially within 48 hours of me seeing the place, they were ready to accept an offer. And I was informed that there were 10 other bidders. So again, I had to go through a process of non-attachment. We're like, well, it may not be the house after all. I guess we'll see. But we did again, going back to Creative Solutions, my agent was like, okay, well, we can tailor your bid to make it really attractive to the sellers. And one of the things I did there was just because I was a renter going into the housing market, I could make my completion date, my completion date, closing date flexible. So they basically give them the choice of that. And apparently for these particular sellers, that was really important. And they accepted my bid.
OMG. And can we just mention that you went through that whole thing, all of the things that we have talked about in 3 months?
3 months. Yep.
Total life transformation. What the
I'm still in shock. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm still in shock.
So cool. I just am absolutely obsessed, in awe, and like so excited for you. Just ecstatic about this. It's amazing. This is really what it's like to take your pain and turn it into power, to take responsibility for the things that you can take responsibility for, to build the life that is bigger and better than. It's just amazing. I'm so proud of you. Like, how do you feel?
Amazing. I'm so excited about life right now. I'm just so excited. Like I can't wait for this next phase.
This is actually a good question that I didn't think of asking you until just now, but did you expect that going in to the program?
No, absolutely not. I did not expect that at all.
Isn't it crazy? Like it just blows my mind when you really put your time and attention and focus and resources into like one thing and go all in.
Yeah, 100%. And really like going into it, like I like dedicating myself to the program for 3 months and changing my outlook on how to sort of approach my breakup and then approach life. Like that was a key pivotal turning point for me to get to this next place. So I am eternally grateful to you, Dorothy, for that.
But you did the work. I'm proud of you. You did the work, and that's what's important. Okay. So is there anything else that you feel like would be beneficial for Bravehearts who might be feeling the way you felt when you started the program? Is there any words of wisdom or advice you want to give them?
Yeah, I guess I would, my words of wisdom would be that, challenge any limiting beliefs that you may have about yourself, because you might be amazed about what you find on the other side. Because I am, I'm in shock about what I found on the other end of that.
Right? If you had to, like, how do we challenge limiting beliefs? Like, what would you say? How did you challenge them? Because I feel like we talk about that. We say like challenge your limiting beliefs, question them. It's such a hard process to describe without going through it. So what would be your advice there?
Well, I think what was helpful for me was just starting to, I think the first step, which you mentioned, is to find evidence that the new belief you want to move into about yourself is true, that you can do things that maybe you're telling yourself you can't do. Like even for me, like with this house, like the maintenance factor, like I actually do know how to use a drill and a hammer, and I had to remind myself of that.
Yes, you do.
Just stuff like that. Like, oh yeah, I like go down the list, like, oh yeah, remember this project you worked on, like these 10 projects you worked on that required a hammer and a drill? Like I could learn how to do that again. That's so first step to that, I guess.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate your time. And I know that the Bravehearts listening appreciate you coming on, sharing your journey, all of your insights and your ahas. And I hope that they take those and they apply them to their life. And I hope you guys, Bravehearts that are listening, I want you to go out and create the impossible. Please, for your life and for mine, continue to believe in what feels impossible to you, because you can go out and create it. And time has nothing to do with it. It doesn't have to take a year. It doesn't have to take 5 years or 10 years. It can take 3 months or less. I love it. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. If you're loving the How to Get Over Your Ex podcast and you want to learn how to get over your ex in 3 months or less to build a life better than the one you thought you had with your ex, I would like to personally invite you to my next group course where we take everything you've learned here on the podcast and apply it to your life. Come check it out at www.lifecoachdorothy.com.